would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. Alrighty, I am here this mercurial evening with one of the co-founding sulfuric members of the excellent Tria Prima podcast. He's a Hellenistic astrologer, Golden Dawn initiate, Knight Templar, theurgical lover of wisdom, 32nd degree Freemason, as current senior deacon of Arizona's Ascension Lodge number 89, Masonic Rosicrucian, business owner, and just all around awesome human, Jake Trayer, and local Arizona native, I might add, represent. It's not too often I run across a native Arizonan. That's kind of cool.
I know we gotta get a. There's a bit of a renaissance of cool guys in Phoenix. I feel like there's a little bit of that going on in North Carolina, a little bit of that in Texas, a little bit of that here in Phoenix. But Phoenix is the coolest for sure.
I would have
no offense to Ike, who I just spoke with last week.
Definitely. Yeah, I think we might be a little bit biased, but I mean, I can't disagree with you on that one.
That's all right.
But we speak online often, but this is really cool to be able to have you on here and do this podcast. I've really been looking forward to it. So, just thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the invite.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it, and hopefully we can do one on Tria Prima here in not too long as well. So kind of return the favor, keep these good conversations going. But I really appreciate also that for the stroke of the ego there with the intro. That's a lot. I guess I am all that. I don't know.
You are a lot.
I feel like an imposter.
Don't we all?
Especially on your podcast. I mean, your podcast is peppered with highly intelligent individuals who like are really interested, engineers and all these like academics, and then you're stuck with me tonight. But that's all right.
Nah, I think you fit in quite well. And then also a random compliment. One of the things I love about just your business, kind of a side note, for the listeners, Jake owns a misting business where he installs like misting systems, and I love that it's called Element Mist, and that you actually use like the alchemical elemental water symbol in your branding. I saw that and I was like, oh, it's so genius. I thought that was really cool.
That's right. Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah, definitely. It's simple but nice.
Goal with the brand anyways.
Yeah,
subtle.
Yeah, it seems like you're aesthetic.
It was easy to get my business partner. Yeah, my business partner, he is like not into the esoteric. He's not it's not his thing. He's a car guy, he's an engineer, very earthy dude, very down to earth, very practical, likes to work with his hands, but not into any of the stuff that we're likely going to talk about tonight. But he understands, and he appreciates that stuff. So when it came time to sort of imbuing some of our business with little hints of meaning like that. He was all for it. So thanks to Joel for being open to a
Thanks, Joel.
elemental name.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Joel.
So I wanted
Bless.
I wanted to ask you, I was looking at the Tria Prima site, kind of looking over your bio and stuff, and it said you chartered the Arizona Lodge of the Ordo Hermeticus Mysterium. That sounds mysterious and interesting. I wanted to ask you, maybe you could speak a little bit to that. What's that all about?
So that group, that's not I was around for its, I guess its inception, at least the Arizona group, but it's of the Golden Dawn lineage. I've actually since left to join another Golden Dawn organization, but it's not for any negative reason. I just have moved on to something that's a little particularly better for my kind of flavor of interests. But yeah, the Ordo Hermeticus Mysteriorum, the OHM, fantastic organization. That was one that really got me going in the sort of deeper occult milieu here in Phoenix. It was one of the first groups that I was in contact with when I sort of made my interest known, at least in the Masanosphere. There were a few guys who were like, all right, well, there's a group you should probably be in, hear about and check out. So that was really my first introduction into Golden Dawn flavored curriculum and ritual work and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, fantastic organization, alive and well. It's all over the place. Yeah, your OHM, you can, I think, I'm trying to think of their website off the top of my head, but they're on Instagram and whatnot. But yeah, OHM, it's a great group.
Cool. Yeah, I thought the name was really catchy, so I wanted to ask you about that.
Oh yes, and of course, you boil it down to the OHM. It's a great name
for sure. It's like the that original sound vibration, the ohm.
The ohm.
So I had listened to your recent interview with Ike Baker, which was awesome, by the way. And I was like, this is cool because I didn't know.
Thank you.
Too much about your background, but it kind of gave me a little bit more of an insight. And I was like thinking I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on some ontological philosophical subject matters. I love to kind of explore the like primary aspects of being, such as things like the body and the mind and the spirit, or body, mind, and soul. And I've found like alchemical philosophies to be very helpful for going deeper into these kind of aspects with various corresponding aspects and associations, salt, sulfur, and mercury for kind of a basic example. And I think the like the Trinitarian models, they can be like a good starting point, but then it kind of seems to get a little bit deeper in terms of like the overall nature of being, especially when I read things like the Corpus Hermeticum or like Iamblichus, which I pretty much just kind of poked through. So I don't even think it'd be fair to say that I've read them. I've kind of just skimmed around a little bit and kind of starting to glean a little bit and get a little bit insight into those texts. And I just think they're so interesting. So I thought you'd be a great person to ask for your perspectives because you're currently absorbed in the Neoplatonic streams, if I recall. And so for you, when you hear the general breakdown of something like mind, body, and spirit, or mind, body, and soul, are those satisfactory models for you? Like, have you arrived at any distinction between, I'll just start with one, like mind and soul or psyche? Do you make a distinction between the psyche and the mind, or the soul and the mind? And if so, I'd be curious if you could describe that understanding and that distinction as far as you've come to conclude.
Well, that's a great question, and one that I feel like I'll unpack the best I can now, but who knows where I'll be, even next year, same time. I feel like my understanding and opinion of or my own sort of ontology is always evolving in a way. So we'll have to do this again in a year and see if I see if I provide the same answer. But that's a good question. So I think before my astrological delvings, which really got deep around or just after COVID. I hate that that's a temporal marker, but it was like that, the onset of the lazy attitude from, or rather the free time that some of that afforded, led me to the path of astrology, and astrology really changed my mind in a bunch of ways. But I used to approach the sort of breakdown of the levels of being in a mental sort of way or a psychological sort of way, and that's actually how I used to think of astrology itself as well. I know you didn't ask about astrology particularly, but it's sort of colored my opinions here, so that's why I reference it. But of course, like you've got the Kabbalion attitude that all is mind or all is mental, which the publishing of that document or that book was really, it came out around the same time where mentalism and psychology, depth psychology and those sorts of things were also becoming really prevalent and popular. And that was my approach to this question before, is that I guess I necessarily understood being sort of stratified out as a transcendent deity, and probably less eminent at that point, like prior to where I'm at now. And that my mind, or the mental stuff, was of my sort of doing, and that the soul was sort of this link between the two. But the mind is something that sort of trips us up and kind of confuses us, and it's the sort of mental stuff that necessarily confuses us, maybe, or strays us from the path, if we can even agree on what the path even is. But let's say your relationship to deity and nature, is the path, or guess, or something, or at least the sort of perpetual discovery of that relationship is the path. Say that the mind is sort of the thing that is always sort of distracting you from that path. And at the same rate, I probably would approach things like astrology and alchemical processes or psychological modalities as all mental and sort of a construct of our psyche, if you will. So then I really started to get into the Neoplatonic stuff and really figure out what ontology was in the first place. And also my viewpoint shift from me to a more or a less separated viewpoint. So I guess my answer before would have been that there is a sort of definite separation between those elements of being, call it the mind or the soul and spirit, those sorts of things. But now, and it's not like Neoplatonism is one, there's not like one agreed upon, ontology. It's like you go from Plato, and then there's sort of this the Middle Platonist, several centuries where things weren't quite metaphysical, or they weren't so worried with Plato's metaphysical ideas for a while, and then you reach Plotinus and the Enneads and that Neoplatonic or late Platonist attitude, which sort of integrated back the metaphysical stuff, and then you get this sort of renaissance of ontological sort of philosophy again. And none of those guys are like on the exact same page. They all kind of build on one another or contradict one another here and there. But what I like is certainly this idea of emanation. I think certainly everything is one thing. So like as a 50,000 foot view, I certainly approach being as just that, period, that we are being, and that being sort of all retracts back to that the one, if we're going to be super Neoplatonic about it. And that the one necessarily emanates out to experience itself and to sort of continually create and emanate and experience that self, and that we are just these sort of fractal participatory aspects of that. And the soul, I guess, now for me is more that human element, that, so again, to sort of lean on my astrological homework, the soul is that thing that is colored by the descent down into the material world. So whether we want to call those spheres that color the soul, the sort of the archetypes, or the, everything that is necessarily composed of in that celestial realm, being the spheres of the stars, and then that being the wandering stars, including the sun, the moon, Venus, Mars, etc., and then the zodiac and whatnot. So the spirit, I guess. I'm doing my best here.
I was gonna ask you about the spirit next, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So the spirit, the way I sort of conceive of it now, is that element of being which makes its descent, and the soul is that aspect of spirit which is necessarily human in our case, and that is colored by these forms or archetypal predispositions that are sort of around us in the celestial sphere. And that's kind of what we see when we look at a natal chart. The snapshot of a natal chart is sort of the color palette of one's soul, and that it becomes your duty as man to paint the painting still, right? So your predispositions, your soul, and in a higher sort of sense, your higher self, or your daimon, your personal daimon, or your holy guardian angel, is that resonant being that is completely metaphysical, right? Are colored by that celestial snapshot, and the spirit is your direct connection, your direct link to the source, to the one, and the soul is more that archetypal coloring that you took on, or when I say your soul takes on when it descends into this sort of material plane. Or I've heard it described also as the light of the one, of God. Let's just call it God, and God being light emanates that light down as a projector would onto a screen, and the screen is the universe, the sort of womb that is the nothingness of the universe, the sort of empty space of the universe, and that light that is refracted and sort of beamed down into the universe from source reaches its end, sort of the mirror of itself in man, and man is that perfect microcosm, and it's the duty of the man to refine the soul such that mirror is polished, so that source can see itself as best it can, if that makes any sense and if that's an answer to your question at all. So
Oh.
I used to take a very mentalist approach, and I used to think that things were like all mind. And to be honest, I've kind of moved away from that that attitude, just for the sake that I don't want people to think that the when we say that all things are mental or all things are mind, that we're talking about our mind. So I think we're just participating in a higher mind. If that makes sense. So I tend to stay away from the word mind now as much as I used to. But generally, I think our mental stuff is sort of the coloring that the soul takes on. If we're not actively participating and co-creating, that we are just sort of led by our sort of lizard brain, and we react to everything, and we're just sort of bouncing through life. And I said this on Ike's podcast, so we don't have the reins. We're just kind of going through it. But anyways, I think that's like my general answer.
No, wow, yeah, that actually is extremely refreshing. And I have to say, I've asked a lot of people similar questions along these lines, and that was probably one of the best answers that I've gotten. And I'd have to totally agree pretty much 100%. Yeah, I see God as the all, essentially, and us individuals as aspects within that greater mind of God. And I just think it's interesting to talk about these concepts of specifically like mind, soul, and spirit, because I think a lot of times people get those things confused. And one of the things that helped me dial it in a little bit more was a conversation I had with a guy named Phoenix Aurelius. He's an operative alchemist, and he broke it down in terms of using the metaphor of laboratory, like laboratory alchemy. And he would say things like, there's the fixed aspects of the soul and the volatile aspects of the soul, and like you were saying, the things that color your personality or your character and things along those lines. And I don't know, I think it lended a lot of insight to that, and then relating it with soul as psyche kind of shifted my perspective between mind as psyche, which I previously kind of had that notion. And so it's always been kind of like a back and forth between kind of thing, me dancing between these ideas of mind and psyche and soul and all of these. So I love just getting anybody's thoughts on all of this kind of stuff, and tying in the spirit aspect, because I think you maybe alluded to, but I do see the spirit as, maybe like that portal that connects us to the all, or it's like that linking factor that is the animating aspect of our soul, perhaps, like that spark of divinity, per se. And then, so you mentioned
precisely.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Kabbalion, which it's one of the books that really inspired my whole journey early on. But I think I had heard or read that it was potentially authored by a guy named William Walker Atkinson, which I know in the book it says 3 initiates. I was curious if you knew anything about that, or do you know anything about William Walker Atkinson himself, or any background with the Kabbalion in general?
I know the name, and I'm sure I have some material on the bookcase behind me, but it's probably been so long since I've looked at the Kabbalion. And in fact, I think I gave my last copy to, I've owned probably 10 at this point and given them to people to spark interest, because it's a great book to spark interest, So and it's not hard to find, so I'm always happy just to give it to someone if they come into my house and say, whoa, what is all that stuff? Here, take this one. But I've heard that. I've also heard Paul Case as being one potentially of the 3, or the one. I don't know. I think the time is, in terms of timeline, both those answers make sense. Now, I don't know much about Atkinson other than probably that potential fact that he would be a potential author of that book. So I unfortunately don't have much to lend you in terms of biography or what, like his involvement or those sorts of things. But I've certainly heard the name, and I think it is, in terms of what I can remember, legit source, like a good source for. I don't think it's someone to like avoid necessarily. It's just it's not someone I have touched in so long.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I was just curious. I was kind of just interested. It's something I haven't really done a whole lot of looking into, but something in the back of my mind I always want to ask. So something that you mentioned, I want to move to the idea of, you said the daemon, not demon, the daemon. First, maybe you can describe what that is, and then I guess I have two questions. First, go ahead and give people a little bit of insight into what that is exactly, and then I'll ask my follow-up questions.
Sure. So I think, again, I'm going to give my best current interpretation of what this means, because it's always in flux, always evolving. But yeah, daimon is distinct from demon. Now, I think demon is where we get this from. So I think one sort of is a kind of a miscalculation of the original conception of this idea. But your daimon is what I would relate to. Probably people have heard of the idea of holy guardian angel or a higher self. I think all those terms are necessarily similar or even the same in concept. So that being that we have a soul, and that soul descended through these planetary and celestial spheres with a daimon, a guardian sort of daimon, a psychopomp of sorts that has led us through up and down, probably, maybe many times through this celestial realm. And then it's my idea, or not my idea, but my current understanding of this concept, that the daimon is colored just like we are, because it's taken that same descent with us through the spheres, and that it remains in the etheric realm and is a representation of ourself in that etheric realm, and is something that, and again, in terms of the sort of psychopomp idea, is our guide. And when we're here in this material reality here, we're sort of steeped in materiality and mundane reality, we're probably not as daimonic self, but the intent of a lot of theurgic practice would be to tune into that entity, or rather to see it and to acknowledge it, and to, in fact, there's a great movie, A Dark Song. I don't know if you've seen it. A Dark Song. It's about it's a great movie. So you should check it out. It's about a woman who hires a magician to help her perform the Abramelin ritual, which is like this many months long, ritual that apparently, like Crowley and some other guys have tried to do. And the end of which, the goal of which is interface with your daimon, your holy guardian angel. And there's a really cool scene at the end. So A Dark Song is a really interesting take on this idea. But I think to put it really succinctly or shortly, our daimon is our higher self, to just keep it simple. And that our daimon shares the qualities that we have. That color palette that I was talking about is shared by our daimon. And our daimon represents the more formal or archetypal self that we are sort of participating in here in materiality. And that to commune or interface with one's daimon is to interface with the forms or archetypes that make up our predispositions as a being down here. And that operation is in order to understand one's character or to know thyself. That's sort of a step in that endeavor, right? In the endeavor to know oneself is they would say that the Greeks, that is, would say ethos, anthropos, daimon. Character is fate.
Ooh.
So that is to say, you know, our kairos, our character. I think that's kairos. What our character? So character is fate, and it seems sort of dichotomous, that idea, because if character seems like something we choose, but fate is obviously something we don't choose. How do you reconcile that? But the idea is that our fate and our character is our daimon. Our archetypal character is our daimon, and that to realize that and to identify that is to understand your sort of etheric fate. You know, you still have to paint the painting, you still have to make choices, and you still have to sort of walk through your life, and there is still free will in terms of that language that is defined by God or whatever. But the identification of that formal or archetype self is the interface with this higher being that is you, your daimon, your holy guardian angel, your higher self, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So is it like the best of us? Would you say is the daimon an aspect of our individual being that is inherent but generally like uncontacted, or is it more of an outside being awaiting contact potentially? Like how do you see that?
I think it's the former. So yeah, the first thing you said. So I don't see it as being this separate entity that's sort of dancing around in this etheric realm that we have to like find passwords and amulets to make to conjure up, you know, like a demon, like this sort of traditional idea of conjuring a demon, you know, and creating a magic circle and like, you know, doing a spell and it enters that thing. So I think that's a great image and maybe a great metaphor to begin to understand it. But really, I think it is our most archetypal self. So I think it is us truly. But I think where we sort of stray down here, where we sort of led astray down here from that idea of our higher self is, well, and especially in modern times, is the sort of unanimated worldview that we live in now. Like nowadays, we're sort of born and raised into a cosmos and into a reality that is dominated by positivistic, scientific, hyper rational, but sort of irrational at the same time, you know, scientific thought, and it's been completely sort of stripped of any animation or any life, true, you know, sort of real life, in my opinion. Yeah. And so especially nowadays, we are pretty divorced from our higher self, just to call it that, mainly because of the sort of cultural context that most of us, are at least in the West, are born into. But to turn that around and to start seeing the world and the cosmos as being animated and full of life is potentially step one. I mean, that's to really turn away from the idea, again, to sort of touch on the all is like mental stuff as being a potentially slippery slope. Is like, yeah, but it's not our mind. Like we're just kind of confused down here. We think we've got it all figured out. You know, we listen to, and I love science. Trust me, I'm super interested in biology and physics and whatnot. But in the same rate, it's all theoretical, right? And the Greeks would say that all that scientific stuff is opinion ultimately. That until we abstract this forms from this material reality, we don't have a really good understanding of material reality itself. And that abstracted realm that we can only conceive of with our sort of intellect is more so that daimonic realm that is more archetypal, more formal, where we think of the archetypes themselves, like love, beauty, justice, or mathematical forms, circleness, squareness, these forms that are never expressed. There's nothing we can put in a test tube, you know, like pi expresses itself everywhere in the universe, but we can't test it. I mean, that's the definition of metaphysics. It's obviously informing material reality, but it's also something we cannot put in a test tube. It's nothing we can scientifically test. Now we can observe the causes of that effect, which is pi, or which is any other archetype, say love, or, you know, non-mathematical forms. But that abstracted realm that is informing this material mess is that sort of daimonic realm, I believe. So our daimon is ourself in the abstracted formal reality. So I don't think we're separate.
Yeah. And okay, and then so would you say that the daimon would fall into the category of mind, or would you put it into a category, or spirit, or is it outside of that, or how would you view the daimon in relation to the mind or the spirit?
Well, actually, I would say it's most closely related with our idea of the soul, because the daimon and the soul have, in theory, taken the same path, because it is our soul's guide. It has taken the same path through emanation or back in the other, you know, in the inverse operation back up the chain. So I think the idea is actually most closely related to what we would conceive of as our soul. So as the soul relates to spirit or mind or psyche, the daimon would relate to spirit or soul. So the spirit being that dove which descends into, you know, it's like we already established, the spirit being more that direct link up the chain to source. I think the daimon is more related to our soul, which is colored by the forms, the archetypes, whatever we want to call those things. And our mind is even further down here, and that's the mind is what allows us either to engage in intellection of these things or not. I mean, the mind is a tool, in my opinion, that we decide how to use or not use. And the mind can be sort of tuned to that soul, or it can be tuned to hyper rationalistic, materialistic sort of endeavors, you know. So I think the mind is probably the thing that we've inherited that allows us to engage in the intellection of soul and spirit and form those things that are higher or more abstracted than the things that we experience with the senses in the sensible realm.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. Yeah, if we have like our soul or our psyche, which is maybe corruptible by circumstance or influence or whatever, but then we have that highest potentiality or psyche or of our psyche or soul being that diamond. So I think that definitely makes the most sense when you put it that way. And sometimes I hit these conundrums with some of these texts when I'm reading them. I just posted this one quote yesterday from the Corpus Hermeticum, which I love because it just really makes you think about things. And one of the lines goes, the mind is in reason, reason is in the soul is in the spirit, and the spirit is in the body. So we have 5 elements or aspects at play there in that little verse. We've got the mind, we got reason, we got soul, we got spirit, and then we got body. So you could kind of like reverse engineer it, and it makes a little bit more clear if you say like your body is housed, your body houses the spirit, which houses the soul, which houses reason. Okay. But then I think that's where that first line, especially where it says the mind is in reason, that's kind of the most interesting. My only thought would be maybe this is speaking of like lowercase or individual mind and the mind of God perhaps as reason. I'm curious what you would think about that statement in that context, like the statement of the mind is in reason, because that one kind of threw me off a little bit when I read that.
Yeah. What do you know? What book in the Corpus Hermeticum?
I want to say it was like the 4th.
Send that to me afterwards.
I will. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yes. So you mentioned context, so I think that's important.
Yeah.
The much of the Corpus Hermeticum, I feel, is very Neoplatonic, mainly because that late Platonism, I think, informed a lot of Hermeticism as well as like early Christianity and some of those other Gnosticism, early theological ideas that kind of made their way further along the timeline than Neoplatonism did in and of itself. But so reason is an interesting. So the line is, help me here. So the line says that the mind is in reason, or reason is in mind. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it starts out by saying the mind is in reason. And I just thought that was a little interesting.
So here's what I would say about that. And this ties into geometry, another sort of love of mine, and also into the idea of abstraction. So what the Greeks did different than, say, the Babylonians and the Egyptians was take the very practical knowledge that was built up over the thousands of years of Babylonian and Egyptian medicine and architecture and mathematics, all that very practical knowledge that was built up for thousands of years. The Greeks took and sort of pulled it out of materiality and placed it in the mind, and said that the only way we can reason is if we rely on the abstraction of reason. So like, here's an example. If we tie a string to 2 sticks and pull it tight, and we use that as a radius for the construction of a circle, which is certainly how the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks would have done that practically in materiality. It's still not as perfect as an algebraic circle, which we can conceive of truly reasonably on, you know, pen and paper, where there's no flaw. It's either true or it's not, right? When we yank those concepts from materiality into the mind, we place them in a realm that is actually able to conceive of the more perfect ideas that those material things rely on. So the idea of a line is more perfect in its archetypal sense, or a circle or a square or what have you, versus those that exist in you know, the real world. So in terms of that specific line, I think it does make sense, and I would say it's reason with like capital R, that real reason is not something that we can sort of dialectically hash out or make sense of materially, but it necessarily has to be yoked to the mind, or to the realm of intellection, to be true, to be truly true.
And
does that make
I think
sense?
so. I think so. And so the realm that you're speaking of in particular, would this be referred to as the archetypal realm?
Yeah, I would say so. So, you know, reason, and here's, now I'm going to say the reason. So the reason those principles would have been lifted from practical use into their abstracted use is because when you abstract these principles, again, they're either true or they're not. And then you can go back into practical application with a set of defined rules. So now we know the algebraic solution for, say, the area of a circle, or the construction of a line, or what, you know, these different very simple practical things. But in the same regard, they would do that with that's what an if-then statement is. That the philosophy of like an if-then statement is built upon that very basic geometric idea that geometry first has to start up here, and we work out the definitive principle of which we can build actual material things based on the sort of formulas that we rely on that are archetypal. So say pi again. Pi is a great example because pi expresses itself all over. We see it all over nature in the universe. However, pi is something that is beyond. It's only sort of lives in the mind as an idea, and manifests, and nature rather participates in, you know, pi-ness. And in the same regard, I would say that statement of, you know, the reason lives in the mind is that reason doesn't live in material. I guess this is what I'm getting to. Reason, capital R, can't happen in the material realm, because the material realm is accidental. It's sort of chaotic. It only loosely follows the rules of the archetypes. So you have to lift yourself from materiality into intellection to really reason. You can't reason with sensible data because it's not deductive. It's all inductive. The only way we can truly use deductive reasoning, which is it's a matter of fact, is what deductive is. That only can happen mentally or in the mind. That is, you know, the essence of deduction, is that we've abstracted this stuff. The reasoning all happens either on pen and paper in your mind with sort of mental calculation, and then it's made manifest back in reality. And we sort of either form things in the world, we build things that participate in those ideas. So I would agree with that statement that real reason we can't rely on material reality to give us reason. We have to go higher than that. We have to go into the realm of intellection, of mind, to necessarily conceive of something that is truly of reason.
Wow. That was
hopefully
fascinating. wow. I'm gonna have to re-listen to that explanation. That was really insightful. Okay, so would you say, okay, so this realm that we're speaking of, would you say it's like the perfected, harmonious realm of form and conception that we derive or utilize as our higher blueprint for our creative expressions if we're going to create something, or if we're going to contact our diamond? Would you say that this realm is associated with our diamonds?
Yeah, totally. I think the way you put that is great. So like the blueprint is a great way to put it. If the I'm in the trades, so often blueprints never get followed, and that's a great that's a great way to it's certainly analogous, because that realm might give us the blueprint, but oftentimes we stray from it here, right? The realm of the senses sort of strays from that path. But I think, yes, to answer your question very, very, pointedly, is yes. It's my opinion that daimonic realm is that perfected blueprint realm or archetypal realm of the forms, and we can get into the weeds about. So here's, back into the question and topic of ontology is, well, how far does the stratification get between us and the one, and what levels of being are there between?
Whole
And I don't think,
hierarchy of
almost
being.
sometimes it's like too much, right? It's like sometimes it's just too. I think it's healthy to get into that if you want to get into henads and all these different ideas about how things are laid out on that chain of being. But ultimately, if we were to just sort of simply lay it out, I think that there's the physical realm, the formal or archetypal realm. I kind of use those interchangeably. I think most people are more familiar with the word archetype than they are some of the world of forms. But
Yes.
being more of a Platonist, I like the word forms more. But anyways, there's that realm that is that more perfected realm, that maybe is that diamond. So let's like use the Pink Floyd album a little bit here. It's like the light from source, hits that diamond or that gem or that crystal
Prism.
and refracts out into its respective, that prism, and reflects or refracts out. What is it? Refracts into its constituent. Yeah, refracts into its constituent colors, and that prism would be that perfect sort of formal realm that light is sort of shining through, and sort of that the coloring that is displayed after the light makes its way through that formal realm is what we kind of experience down here, of the multiplicity of reality down here is that refraction.
Yeah.
And those
beautiful...
forms are the thing that spirit or that light refracts through.
That's a beautiful analogy. I love that. Okay. So kind of along these lines of like reason or purpose. So something I wanted to get into with you, you briefly mentioned on Ike's podcast, which shout out to Ike Baker of Arcanum, by the way, killing it, bro. You touched on earlier too, as well. You mentioned briefly this sort of like Neoplatonic reconciliation or relationship between free will and determinism. And yeah, maybe expand on your understanding of how you've come to understand these things.
Sure. So here's where we, like you said, reconciliation. Here's where we have the fun of reconciling two seeming opposites. I mean, it's hard to conceive of something more opposite than the blackness and whiteness of choosing versus not, right? Fate versus free will. And here's how I see it, is that, the universe is both finite and infinite. I think science is pretty close to agreeing that the universe we live in is probably infinite in its expanse. There's obviously a cosmic horizon that we can't sensibly see beyond, but there's no reason to believe that it stops where we just can't see. So the universe is interesting in that it expresses infinitude, but also finiteness in the same way, right? I mean, we're here, there's time, there's a mouse here, there's things that are finite that we interact with. Time is, our lives are finite, but the universe holistically is infinite as far as we can tell. And I think there is a language that is defined similarly that allows us for a nice way to conceive of the idea of determinism versus non-determinism. And it goes like this, at least from my perspective, that you know English, you know the language. If I began a sentence and just said I shut and stopped there, you might be able to reasonably finish the sentence and say the door, or my friend out of my life, or the light off, right? There's a handful, maybe more than a handful of ways that you could reasonably finish off that sentence. And the language we use is seemingly infinite in its potentiality. Like the potential that a language affords us to communicate ideas and emotions is almost infinite in its potential. I mean, there are just so many ways to spice rack language and have it still be beautiful and harmonious, right? So, but here's the thing: it is a language, and there are rules. So not only is it sort of infinite in its potentiality, but it's also finite in its construction, or in the way that we're supposed to sort of use it to convey harmony and beauty, or to convey it's a symbolic thing. I mean, we're conveying emotions and ideas with a language that is that we've constructed out of sound symbols that we've, over time, as we grow up, learned how to use. And I think that in the same way, there is sort of an underlying language, or a law, a word, maybe the logos or something like that, that defines the terms of reality here. And that in terms of expression, its potential is seemingly infinite. Like your will, you may direct in a bunch of different ways. And here's where it's important to know your character, to ethos, anthropos, daimon, to know thyself. To begin to know your character is to know maybe best where you should begin to direct your will. You probably aren't, like, I'm not going to be an NBA player. Like, I know that, and it's probably a waste of my time to direct my will towards towards that end. So that's sort of the law that I know exists and that I have to follow. So I'm kind of going off track here. Let me get back on track. So the same way that a language affords us infinite potential, but also confines us to a finite, set of rules, I think that reality has a sort of underpinning of a similar set of rules that allows for seemingly infinite potential, but a very finite and structured set of rules that we might conceive of as being fated. So we have free will insofar as we can speak the language how we want to speak the language, or we can direct our will to the sort of end that we feel like we want to direct it towards. But the sort of cogs of causation are always happening. I mean, time is always trudging along, and although we have the potential to do almost endless things and direct our will into sort of endless potential, there's this finite set of rules that allows for the mechanism of fate to still play out. So my idea of fate is, and I kind of said this a little bit on Ike's podcast, is like, and this isn't my analogy, it's probably something I heard from Jamie, is that, the fate is what is the horses that are going. You're in a carriage behind a group of horses and they're going, and that's your life. You're headed in a direction, and that's fate. But to take the reins and to start to steer that carriage is where free will comes in. So you're not going to stop the carriage. You're not going to be able to stop that from happening, but the honing and direction of the will towards some end is where your will or free will comes in. So I think that's generally how I reconcile fate and free will as happening both at once, is that they are both existent. There is a level of fate and a level of free will, just like there is in a language. Like there is lots of free will to say lots of different things, but we're also confined to the rules of the language.
Absolutely. And yeah, I did hear you mention that pretty much exact analogy on one of the podcasts. I don't know if it was Ike's or if it was the Tria Prima one, but I thought it was really great, and it definitely lended insight. And I think that you kind of also tied in the whole, astrological model as well, in terms of like your soul's general trajectory. And I just thought it was great.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so interesting, the subject of the will, free or not. And I guess there's like the lowercase will and then the uppercase will, or the true will. Would you say that the true will is said to direct you towards your destiny? Because on that note, when talking about destiny, it's not to be confused with fate. Because I actually, a few months back, I was having this conversation with my buddy TJ Bell, because his band, it's called Escape the Fate, and we were discussing the difference.
Totally.
We were discussing the difference between fate and destiny, and originally I was like, yeah, I think they're the same, but then I kind of ended up coming to the conclusion that they're not the same. And my thought, after kind of looking more into it, was that destiny's like as a co-creator, one's soul's willfully intended mark or impression on the moment as it fades into its evaporation or dissipates into passing. By one's choosing or choices, one can direct or impose their intention or awareness or conscious energy onto any given moment or circumstance, and kind of impress their intention and energy upon that architectural framework of any given situation, so to speak. But that takes effort and willpower to, kind of act conscious or willing, not necessarily out of impulsivity, but sort of like, in that case, you are truly manifesting your destiny. So when somebody maybe forfeits or gives up their destiny, they're basically just allowing fate to take its course, which is maybe like a sort of predestined trajectory that runs off of momentum. So maybe predestined momentums are sort of correlated with probable determinations, but it's I don't know. It's not really determined. I don't think it's in the sense of like absoluteness or anything, but maybe that's the idea of like say like one's astrological proclivities and their chart and their the sort of path that they're heading. I don't know. What do you think about all that?
I think the last little bit that you just said there is spot on, because I think I would have, the only thing I would have said had you not just said it is that our astrological proclivities are, you know, the fate that we experience, especially if we let it take its course, you know, for better or for worse, fate sort of takes over. So I think ultimately where we're all headed is back to unity. You know, that I think that's our sort of ultimate end. But yeah, I don't know how else to spend. I think you actually kind of summed it up there towards the end. I think you kind of fleshed out the answer that I would have said, and I think the way that you put it in terms of astrological proclivities are a way to understand how fate sort of takes over in the case that we're not being conscious about where our will is sort of directed. But you also said it nicely that that's sort of a fleeting thing, right? That like dissipates. We kind of participate. We participate on a daily basis and direct our will towards a number of different things, and we're involved in a number of different things, and it's always sort of undulating and in and out of different, participating in different things, and we're sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's a little unconscious. And this is where we get a little Jungian about it. It's like when we let the unconscious take over, that's sort of letting fate take its course.
Yes.
Or letting those so what, you know, Jung would say, make the unconscious conscious, right? Did you just post? Someone just posted that. I feel like it was maybe you.
Nope, I don't think that was me, unless it was in different words, but not that specifically.
I think I just saw it somewhere. But yeah, letting the unconscious take the wheel is that idea of our astrological proclivities, or rather just to say fate takes its course, but rather to know thyself, to understand our character, to be conscious about where we're directing our will. Those are all things that now we've taken the reins. We've, whatever, you know, if we is our soul, you know, we've taken the reins, and we're being conscious now. We've made the unconscious conscious, and we're sort of directing our own fate in a way, still within the confines of our character. Because again, we still follow the rules. You know, those proclivities that you speak about, they don't go away. But now we're painting the painting in a different way. We're still using the same color palette, but now maybe we're painting a painting that's more harmonious and more beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I heard something that alluded to the notion that the fuel of destiny is faith, and fate operates with the absence of faith. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because it implies that just the faith alone is enough to offset one's fate. And I think it was Caroline Miss that says that when you're to manifest your destiny, you're essentially you're aligning upon, like, you're aligning with the allies of the invisible world, or some mystical force that exists that we have access to, if so we choose to access it or them, which maybe that would be kind of correlative with the daemon or the archetypal world, for example. You know, so for example, I could say I was gonna stay home and not go to the gym because I was feeling pretty lazy, but then I said to myself, I'm gonna, you know, I'm not gonna let fate get the best of me. I'm gonna choose destiny and utilize my true will and go to the gym. Maybe that's something that would be like an example of utilizing that particular thing practically. I don't know. Maybe that ties into things like theurgical concepts. And then maybe this would be an interesting segue. I'd love to get your thoughts on like what is God working or theurgy? Can you maybe give an example or any context to what theurgical practice may look like and or its general kind of functionality?
Yeah. So we would say, I love that analogy of the gym. Like that, what you just said there is, I think, rather perfect in terms of what we're talking about. So theurgy, God working, like you said, would be the mitigation of fate. So I think it's exactly what we're talking about. I think theurgy is the effort one takes to align oneself with destiny. And I think if we are to be, if we're to sort of agree on anything, hopefully it's that our destiny is to sort of be one, be whole again with source or with God. I think that is sort of, again, it's implied in the name, God working, right? So theurgy theurgy is exactly everything that we were just talking about. I think theurgy is again, if we're going to put it in Jungian terms, making the unconscious conscious. We're going to say, like you just said it, I think it's about it's the effort of mitigating one's fate. And I think that there are a number of ways to be a theurgist. Are a number of practices one could engage in that one might call theurgy or theurgic processes. But ultimately, I think theurgy requires some asceticism, so some turning away of I think there is a level of required discipline in terms of, and this is where I think Masonry does a great job of sort of hopefully enforcing the idea of, keeping your passions within due bounds and sort of hewing off the rough and superfluous aspects of one's life and focusing less on things like money and material possessions and stuff like that. So I think there's this ascetic, sort of necessary asceticism that comes with a theurgic lifestyle. But I think the main thing that makes a theurgist is the discipline and regularity of that lifestyle, if you will. So to really be a God worker is to do that sort of relentlessly, and to do that is to be in constant harmony with God. Now we can argue about what that means, certainly, and plenty of people have, but I think the rigorous harmony that you conform to with your creator is theurgy. So whether that's a hymn or a candle burning or an incense burning or a sacrifice one's made or a offering one is made or a consecration or a statue animation or a talisman creation or an astrological election for a meditation or an action, all of those things, if done in the vein of harmonious of the harmonious interaction with deity, is theurgy. That's God working to me. And at some point that takes over instead of the unconscious sort of fated lifestyle. At some point, I think there is a shift where that becomes your sort of, stasis, is that contemplative state where almost all of your actions are done through that paradigm, or all of your doings, your will is now always sort of acting in that regard. if that makes sense. So I think the kind of wise theurgist, the wise master, is one who no longer has to think about doing it. They just are, they embody it.
Love how you put that. Rigorous harmony. That was a beautiful combination of words. I love that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts. Maybe you could, this is shifting gears a little bit, but maybe you could say a little bit about Templarism, or what it means to be a Knight Templar. Because I think there's different lineages of Templarism, and there's just a very deep depth of information in terms of a Knights Templar and what that all represents. So I'd love to get any of your thoughts personally on just how you view it, or what you've gleaned from it, or some of the highlights in terms of the maybe philosophical or any other things that you just feel are important in terms of Templarism.
Yeah. This is where I'm going to be. I'm less versed here, and I know I'm a Masonic Knight Templar, and that is one of those claims to Templarism that exists out there. I don't think. I'm sure there's plenty of people who are going to disagree with me with what I'm about to say, but I don't know that there are any, direct Templar lineages that go back to those monastic knights that we know about, the poor knights, that protected the pilgrimage and communed with the Sufi mystics and all that sort of. But I think what a lot of the Templarism that I've become, so it's very monastic and chivalric. Those seem to be like two prevalent sort of themes that come up when we talk about Templarism. It's like one giving oneself up to the cause almost completely, right? You're almost immediately relinquishing your will to the will of that order, and the Templar will seems to be very Gnostic in the sort of scholastic sense to me. So Gnostic being like the Hermeticists who hate materiality. Like, so again, I'm less versed here, and even though I've received the Knight Templar, grade in the Masonic York rite, that's not been my area of interest, not been my area of study. But it seems like there's an emphasis on the kind of the denial of the material realm, and a heavy emphasis on a chivalric and monastic lifestyle that I have a hard time reconciling personally. Like, I don't think I can sort of achieve the level of as separated from asceticism, which I think is a level of sort of keeping yourself within due bounds. Monasticism is sort of the step beyond that, which is like complete denial of material reality and almost a hatred for it, and this sort of complete and utter turning towards what is higher, what is beyond this. And I think for me, I have a hard time with that, and that's maybe why I haven't gone down this route as far. And maybe I'm wrong, so I'd love some real Knight Templars to correct me here. But I just the monasticism is hard for me to reconcile. I don't hate the world. I don't hate material reality. It exists, and it exists for a reason, I feel like, to me. It's here for us as a sort of signpost. I mean, it is. I believe everything is the one. So I believe that the one expresses itself through nature and the universe. And I think that it's not something to like turn away from and to sort of try to completely tamp down throughout our lives. I think there's a healthy amount of denial materialistic tendencies, but I think the complete denial of materialism in general is maybe also unhealthy. And that, from my perspective, seems like some of the hardcore Templar sort of mentality, and also the complete sort of giving of oneself to the hierarchical sort of nature of that group. So beyond that, I really don't know. I've read a little bit of Tracy Twyman's Baphomet book, which is like all about the Templar stuff, and I love the sort of lore of the origins of the Oraphic heads that we call Baphomet or Mohammed or whatever the story is there. I think that's really interesting, and I like the chivalric nature because I think that is in line with the writing of one's character. I think chivalry is a part of that, and I think that's what Middle Age Europe. That's one part of Middle Age Europe that we have to sort of think is that chivalric push by orders like the Templars. But again, I just have a hard time with the denial of material reality and the sort of hatred of it, that sort of Gnostic idea that material reality is here to just screw us over. I see a lot more beauty in it than that. And also the reason I'm an entrepreneur is because I have a hard time working for people. I think I'd be a bad Knight Templar because I'd be like, I don't want to give up my stuff for this whole thing. I like my stuff,
Yeah. Dude, it's funny.
And I'm sorry, it's a bad answer to your question, but
I don't think so at all.
That's about all I know.
Yeah, no. It's funny you mentioned Tracy Twyman. I was actually recently going down a rabbit hole, probably because I heard her name mentioned on the Tria Prima podcast. But I went down this rabbit hole exploring her and some of her investigations with some sketchy, like, pedo abuse groups actually here in Arizona, and all of that shit was crazy, and it's kind of scary. But yeah, she definitely did have a very like deep explorative mind in terms of her analysis and exploration into things like Baphomet in particular, and kind of breaking it down in terms of her research and kind of going into the symbolic representations from a historical perspective and all that. And I thought it was really like cool and informative, like listening to some of the things that I did listen to of her. Super crazy though in terms of what her passing and some of the people she was involved with during her investigations of some sketchy stuff.
Oh my gosh,
that shit was wild. I'm actually kind of like worried about even talking about it because it was so crazy. But I I agree with you. Like I love the whole balance aspect of it. Like I find beauty and joy in this realm, and I know it, and it may not be a popular opinion, but I really do. Like I know that materialism is not everything, nor is spiritualism. I think the key is to kind of apply both and acknowledge both in terms of your perspective, and kind of operate with both in mind. And I talked to a guy, another Knights Templar, a member, Ian Ferguson, really cool dude. And he kind of talks about and goes about speaking about things in terms of which, this whole concept can be seen in many different ways, but he uses the term, the Luciferian aspect of things, and then the Malachian, or say Ahrimanic aspect of things, which basically you could break down in terms of like ultimate liberation and ultimate materialism. And the goal is, like, if you look at like Rudolf Steiner's work, he would use the term Ahriman in terms of the entity that is kind of propelling this materialism into the world. But he would kind of gravitate and draw attention towards that Christ, or the Christos aspect of things, would be that middle path aspect of that in between. Like you're not going too much towards only the spiritual realm, and you're not going too much towards the material realm, but you're operating kind of somewhere in the middle with both of them in mind. And maybe this is what would be comparable to like the middle path or something along those lines. But I always thought that was a good, fair assessment, and that's something that I can relate to for sure. But yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out there with kind of in response to what you said. Another interesting question. I'd like to get your take on Jesus. Do you think Jesus was a real person? Do you think he was an allegorical figure? For me personally, it doesn't matter. I'm more about like the importance of the whole message and all of that. I just am curious, like in terms of what other people think. But yeah, the biblical Jesus, what are any of your thoughts that you have in regards to that figure?
I actually think it ties in kind of neatly with what we were just talking about, but in terms of the middle path and what you were just talking about with you know the Christ motif, to first answer, you know, the reality or not of the actual, you know, potential living figure of Jesus. I think that's less important actually. So like you already said, I think the message there is probably more important than the, you know, the historical Jesus being real or not. I think there was probably a like a Joshua, you know, that lived, Yeshua or whatever. So I think there's a high likelihood that Jesus was real, a real figure that, you know, that had disciples, that a lot of the story that we read in the Bible is likely true in terms of, you know, from a general perspective. There was a guy that lived in a certain place that was around this time that had these followers, you know. I'm not too doubtful of that fact, but again, that's sort of less important for me. I think actually, if you told me tomorrow that the whole Bible is fiction, I actually don't think that devalues it anymore. Because I find the value in the meaning behind all those things, because I think it's a really meaningful story. So how it ties in with our last conversation, I think Jesus represents the one thing that we can align or that rather we can participate in, that allows us to fall upon the middle path whether we like it or not, and I think that's love. So I think the real amazing thing that Christianity built upon the Neoplatonists was the idea of living in love, because I think when you do that, all of the other necessary virtues are inherent. Like they have to fall after someone who's living out of love, right? So things like justice and beauty and mercy and truth and all of the worthy virtues that we think about as being good, capital G good, come if we just live from love. And I think if you boil down that whole motif, that's what it boils down to, is a life lived in love. So probably the most valuable insight, I think, like that is to me the mystery of Christ, is the idea of, as hard as it can be to sort of to live in that way, because we're sort of always interacting with a world that seems to be chaotic and evil and sad, and you know, many people are depressed, and there's war and strife and sickness and all these things, right? There's all these reasons for us not to live in alignment with love, or to be constantly participating in love. But to do that, I think, is the mystery. So if one can sort of figure that out, like Christ did, because that's what Christ did. He just participated wholly in love, everything else fell into place. And that, I think that's sort of the essence of what we were talking about before in terms of finding that middle path is, we don't need to have hatred for the material realm. And we don't need to have, this sort of modern hatred for this idea of a higher power. There is this reasonable middle path that is not that hard to conceive of, but extremely hard to practice. And that is the mystery of like divine and constant participation in love. And you probably, it's probably easier to do that when you study like the different types of love. So that's why I think it's necessary to kind of go back to Greek stuff, because they had different definitions of love, and they really defined and unpacked what love meant. And we've really kind of boiled that down, and at least in English, we just have like the word love, and it's really not that great of a word. So, but ultimately, that's kind of where I think. So Christ probably existed. What's more important is that Christ lived in love.
Yeah, no, definitely. I pretty much agree with what you just said. And I do think it's so fascinating looking back at the Greek interpretations and writings of things, because they break everything down in such depth, and they have so much more meaning to a lot of their words. And I find it myself kind of just gravitating more and more towards trying to understand different sort of Greek interpretations of things. Exactly what you're talking about. Like with love, I think they have like 5 different forms of or types of love or something like that. And it's really cool. Even in terms of time, there's like, we've got like Chronos and then Kairos time, or like divine time, and I think like things like that are also super fascinating. And yeah, okay, so I got maybe like 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap it up. I often hear a lot of things about like Freemasonry in association with kind of like moral teachings, but I don't often too much hear a lot about like those moral teachings. And maybe this is something that's reserved and you might not be able to speak on, but if so, maybe you can lend any insight into morality and moral teachings as they pertain within Freemasonry. Maybe you could speak to your own experience or any insight in that regard that you can lend. That would be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said earlier, Freemasonry really heavily relies on classical ideas. So when we talk about like these Greek virtues, that makes up the Masonic sort of paideia, rather school of morality. So Freemasonry is philosophy. That's how I like to define it, because philosophy is a love of wisdom, and I think that's what Freemasons embody. I think we are all hopefully lovers of wisdom. I think that's kind of what drives a lot of men to Freemasonry. If I had to sort of tack one more word onto that, I think it's a moral philosophy. So it is philosophy, point blank, period, but also it is a moral philosophy. And it's a moral philosophy in that when you take your oath as a Mason and you swear to not give up the signs and secrets of a Mason and those sorts of things, none of that information is stuff that you couldn't immediately search right now on Google and tell me to my face as we're having this conversation. And my oath isn't that I would give a shit if you did. My oath is that I wouldn't tell you, and that represents, if a man can't keep something like a grip or a handshake a secret, then he's probably not fit to be a part of an organization that recognizes a higher power as its essential sort of axis for being a thing at all. So it's a moral philosophy in that the tools of stonemasonry or operative masonry are employed as symbols in speculative Freemasonry, which is what most people know of now as being Freemasonry, right? Most Freemasons aren't also operative stonemasons nowadays. But what we've done is we've taken those tools and we've used them and leveraged their essences as symbols in a new light. And that new light, rather than the practical, this kind of ties in with the first thing we were talking about, is like abstracting sort of this practical use of these things and making a more archetypal or fundamental use for these things. As you know, we've taken the square, or let's use the compass rather. We've taken the compass, which you would use to construct a circle, and we say something very simple like, you know, you should be the center of that compass, and the boundary that you necessarily inscribe when you use that compass is your own personal boundary. And the interesting thing about a compass, of course, is that you can make it wider. You can make your circle bigger. You're not necessarily confined to a certain size or a certain, diameter or radius. But we've taken all these symbols and we've applied a moral value to them. And then we through a progressive system of degrees, impress upon the candidate certain stories and allegorical stories that we weave these symbols through, such that this mental temple is built so that the candidate who is going through the Masonic degrees has a place to sort of put all these tools and symbols, right? So if you just like do a slideshow and you just like blurt out all these symbols without any sort of context, it's unlikely that they'll be able to really remember any of it, or maybe they will just rote memorize it, which is really valueless. But you construct over a system of degrees this pneumatic temple, this etheric temple, if you will, or this mental temple that allows a candidate, as they walk through their mundane life, to be constantly remembering, whether they're driving in their car or talking on the phone or interacting on a podcast, the application of those tools in a moral sense. So over time, the Mason sort of falls upon the compass and the square and the trowel and the setting maul and all these tools, not as tools, but as points of contemplation and points of remembering sort of what it means to be a good, decent human being, such that they don't get angry behind the wheel and they're not quick to flip someone off and they're not quick to brake check. There's very simple, mundane explanations for this, but like the whole idea is that it's the same perennial philosophy that, the alchemists and the Rosicrucians and the this and this and this that has, gone down through time. But it's taken that perennial philosophy and repackaged it in such a way that the candidate has these actual tools in their mind that they can sort of work with, but in a moral sense. And the brotherhood, as well as the belief in a supreme being, is really what holds that man to that lifestyle at that point, right? There's been plenty of times. I joined when I was 19, so I was still pretty young when I became a Master Mason. But I'm sure I would have been a complete moron through my 20s. Like I am already a moron, but I would have been like totally useless to society had I not had the sort of circumscription that Freemasonry afforded me, and the brotherhood that held me accountable, and the recognition of the immortality of the soul and a belief in a supreme being that sort of colored my choices. But it really was Freemasonry that impressed those things upon me, because I needed that. I had a hard time finding that in a faith-based system like Christianity or Judaism, or, you know, I explored with some of those. I wasn't raised a particularly religious sense, but it was the tools of Freemasonry that really got me to understand what being good means, like what it is to be good. And really the way it got me to do that was just to spark sort of inspired contemplation about all these things. So if it did nothing else for me, it got me to turn inwards, you know. So the tools are that simple. They're symbolic tools that we employ to impress moral truths, and those moral truths are very much, you know, Greek virtues, you know, classical virtues.
Wow. Okay, that was beautiful. Would it be difficult for you to maybe elaborate a little bit on what it means to be good?
Ooh. Well, Plato had a hard time doing that, so I'm definitely going to have a rough time. But so, oh man, yeah. So our the late most worshipful Rex Hutchins, who passed not too long ago. He was a past Grand Master in the state of Arizona, and he's an author, a fantastic Mason, and really an inspiring individual. He said in a few of his lectures that that simplicity is, or rather, oh man, I'm gonna botch Rex right now, and I'm gonna get so much hate for it. But essentially, what he would say is that profundity is inversely related to complexity. So I loved that, and I love the idea that simple answers are the most profound. So in that sort of vein, I think the way I would answer what does it mean to be good is to participate in love. So going back kind of to that one of the previous answers, because remember, I it's my opinion that if we act in love constantly, if that's sort of our static sort of, if we always revert to love, I think the rest of the virtues are unavoidable. Now, love is extremely hard, so that's why it's not such an easy path. It's easy to say, it's not as easy to practice. But I think my really simple answer to what does it mean to be good is to live in love. Now, I guess the more complex answer is to start to understand your relationship to nature and the cosmos and God in terms of harmony, because harmony is what it expresses itself in so many ways, whether it's music or architecture or mathematics or interpersonal communications. Harmony seems to be what sort of forms beauty in our reality. And if we can key into those things and start to harmonize with those things, I think that's a really good step in aligning ourselves with a good sort of lifestyle. I think it's really clear to us, and our intuition is actually, we should give it more credit, because we know intuitively when we are living sort of disharmoniously, right? Talk about going to the gym or not, or drinking too much, or engaging in a certain act too much. I think your intuition generally knows when you're participating in something that is sort of disharmonious or inharmonious, whatever the term is. So really to begin to listen to your intuition, which maybe is like what we were talking about at the beginning with the holy guardian angel or the daimon is to begin to align yourself harmoniously, and that the next step, once you've sort of began to walk in a more harmonious way, meaning, a way that is reminiscent of how all of the different mystical traditions would describe the sort of middle path, right? Is what gets you most of the way. And then to sort of turn up the love thing, or to tune in rather to the love thing, is the necessary sort of step beyond that, which makes the rest of that middle path, virtuous life, a constant rather than a trial. And then love becomes the trial, and the virtues become your legacy, per se. That's how you become remembered. But I don't know. That's such a hard question. What is the good? What is that? I don't know. Capital G good. Plato couldn't answer. He had a hard time, but he employed the divided line to explain sort of the hierarchy of the good, and the divided line relies on harmony. So that's kind of why I bring that up.
Didn't you do some recent lecture, or are you currently doing some lecture on the divided line in particular?
Yeah. So I'm doing that one kind of probably throughout this year. I've been asked to record. I'm gonna, whether I do it just here on my whiteboard at home, or I record it in one of the lodge lectures, I'll get it online. But
Nice.
Yeah, the divided line is fascinating because most people know about Plato's cave. A lot of people have heard of Plato's cave. It's probably the most famous allegory of all the Platonic dialogues. But what I think a lot of people don't realize, and what I didn't realize even a few years ago, is the cave allegory was all in an effort to explain the divided line. So really the cave comes after the divided line. It was Plato's effort to sort of help unpack what he meant by the divided line. And the divided line is kind of hard for us nowadays because we don't rely on Euclidean geometric education anymore. Around 100 years ago, that went away in standard education in the West. And Euclidean geometry used to be the basic fundamental sort of starting point for a logical progression of education. So the divided line is kind of hard for a lot of people because it relies on that geometry as a rather, Plato relies on your ability to sort of construct the divided line in your head or on a piece of paper. And it's without really knowing fundamental geometrical Euclidean properties and axioms, it's hard to even get the first step in. But yeah, the divided line's great. I do a cool presentation. I'm trying to get better at it because right now I'm putting a lot of guys to sleep with it. But in essence, it's how through Socrates, Plato describes the nature of the good. And ultimately what he says is that the good is to the intelligible realm as the sun is to the visible realm. And that's about as close as he gets to describing the good, if that's a description at all. So again, the good is to the intelligible as the sun is to the visible. And there's all sorts of tributary paths that you can take from there.
Wow.
But I love that.
I love it too. I consider you a black belt in philosophy. I think your intellect and your mind is fucking awesome. This conversation is epic. I wanted to ask you before we wrap this up. Absolutely. do you have any last thoughts, any closing, any messages that you want to put out there? Anything you would like? And then after that, we can maybe direct people to any links or any uh articles or anything else that you would like to direct people to.
All right. Put me on the spot. I like it. I don't know. I feel like I'm the opposite of how you just. I feel like I'm a white belt in thinking and philosophy and all that stuff. Even maybe I don't even have a belt on. My
That's
pants
lit.
are around my ankles, and I'm stumbling. But I think if I was gonna if I had a mic and the world was listening, I would probably say something that would just a lot of people would hate or misunderstand, but something to the effect of turn inward. I think ultimately, like I said just a minute ago, we've sort of devalued the intuition in modern times. I think it begs for a lot more value than what we've given it culturally in the West, at least. And I think to tune into your intuition is a great step to think, to meditate, to start to begin to contemplate your existence and what it means to be here is really important. And I think that's what a lot of people maybe nowadays just aren't doing because
Okay,
culturally it makes more sense just
one
to
one
watch.
more thing real quick. Before you go on,
Yeah,
can you kind of elaborate a little bit on intuition and what exactly that is and your perception or conception? Because some people might be,
sure.
curious.
Yeah. Call it your gut. I think intuition is that voice in the back of your head. Your intuition is maybe the voice of that daimon that we were talking about earlier. I don't know if I have a great, succinct definition for intuition because intuition is sort of antithetical to the idea of defining in a weird way, or definition in general. But intuition, I think, is that part of us that operates most cleanly with the archetypes in the formal realm, which informs our material reality. So that when we tune into our intuition, which I would say, we in modern sort of vernacular and language, we call it our gut. Oh, follow your gut or follow your. I think we still use the word intuition generally, and I don't disagree with the conception that it is sort of our internal knowledge of what is good and what is right. I think that is worthy of listening to. So I think your intuition tells you when you're being good or not being good. And your intuition is also smarter than you think. I think if you're thinking about a problem or a proposition which is risen in your life, say there's a friend in your life that you need to have a very hard conversation with. Your intuition probably has the answer. It's a matter of turning inwards and maybe meditating and listening to your intuition or praying, right? That's an intuitive sort of method for which to gather some sort of conclusion about how you should act. And the intuition operates in that intelligible realm, which the good illuminates, right? So it isn't this sensible thing. It's not, it sort of eludes definition because it is only intelligible. And the intelligible, Plato would say, is above the material. It's above this realm of opinion that is all sensible. Your intuition is what is actually tuned into what is intelligible, what is being illuminated by the good. So if you listen to your intuition, you're seeing, at least maybe in a fleeting way, what is good. So your intuitive mind, everyone's got it. It's a matter of listening and turning inward, I think. Yeah. But to so what was our final question? I forget. Oh, the message.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of the message. Yeah, I think that would be the message, is to tune into yourself. I think, we rely a lot on authority figures in modern times, whether they're a scholarly figure or a president or a boss or a parent, which, authority figures are nice when they're right. But we should give ourselves more credit. You don't need to have a degree. You don't need to read a billion books to be intelligent and to be good. So I think that is the sort of thing that I would give to people, is just to say, spend some time with yourself. Turn off the world for some time on a regular basis if you can, and start to establish some sort of connection with the self, which I think is essential for any further philosophical or metaphysical sort of delvings. And that is good, capital G, to start to sort of tune into what the self is.
Where would you point people in terms of finding out more about yourself? Any of your projects that you may be working on? Any links, any websites, anything in general?
All right. So Tria Prima is the podcast. That's triaprima.co, or Tria, and we couldn't afford the M. Triaprima.co. You can, that's the same thing on Instagram, Facebook, just search Tria Prima. That's kind of I got to do more content in all these avenues. So I do, most of my content is like live, speaking, like I'm doing a live astrology class at a really cool shop in Phoenix coming up here, and that'll likely be on a regular basis. So if you're interested in astrology, follow me on Instagram. So it's _Jake_LVX_. And that's kind of where I do most of my interacting with friends and family, and also people who are interested in this sort of stuff. So my Instagram and then the Tria Prima site is where I'll do most of mine. But if you're interested in say astrology, I do readings when I can. I'm a business owner, and that's my contracting business is my main thing. But when I can fit people in, I'll do some astrology readings. So if you're interested in some practical astrological, like a natal chart reading, hit me up on Instagram, just DM me. Or if you're interested in writing or contributing, even as a blogger or anything like that, hit us up through Tria Prima.
Right. And is there that next to live event that you're doing with your speaking? What's the name of that venue, just for any Arizonans that may be listening?
Yeah, so that's they just moved. It's Curious Nature Shop. They got a great following. Their Instagram's awesome. They've been in Phoenix for a long time, and they just moved to the Melrose area. So they got a much bigger space and a dedicated classroom now. So they're going to be doing all sorts of cool classes, tarot stuff, astrology. They've got cool taxidermy and entomology classes. But Curious Nature is where I'll be doing the in-person astrology 101 classes. I don't know the frequency that we're going to be doing those classes yet, but I'll quickly tell you when I think it's March 12th, 1 to 3 p.m. is the first one. And Curious Nature, their website is where you can buy tickets for that. Yes. March 12th is the inaugural class, 1 to 3 p.m.
Epic.
In Phoenix. Curious Nature.
That's awesome. It's cool.
If you're a Mason, sorry, I was just going to say, if you're a Mason, I'll be doing the divided line lecture at Acacia Lodge in let's see, I'm sorry, I'm gonna look quickly, in April. And then April 4th at Acacia Lodge is the next time I'll be doing the divided line lecture. But one of those times I'll record it and put it online, probably on the Tria Prima YouTube.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the further expressions on the Tria Prima YouTube. I know that you guys have kind of been holding off on that one a little bit, but I'm looking forward to that. Your podcast is excellent, by the way. I love tuning in and listening to your guys' episodes. It gave me a lot of insight and information into different things, especially in terms of your astrological subject matters. Super informative. Jake, you're the man.
Well, likewise, your podcast is fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This was awesome. I greatly appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time. And I think this is going to be a really awesome episode for people listening. Can't wait till hopefully we do another one. Maybe I'll jump on there with you guys on the Tria Prima podcast. But yeah, man.
Please.
Thank you.
Sky, thank you so much. It was great. Let's do it again.
All right.